All right, let's go to California now. And Rose Gottemoeller is a distinguished lecturer at Stanford at the Center for International Security and Cooperation. Before that, Rose, you were the Deputy Secretary General of NATO. You were the Undersecretary for Arms Control Verification and Compliance, where I know you from, and the Chief Negotiator on the Strategic Arms Control Treaty, which, in case most people don't know, governs more than 90% of the weapons on the planet, nuclear weapons on the planet. Rose, you signed this letter along with about 500 former military officers, security people. It doesn't seem, and I've known you for a while, this doesn't seem like something that you would normally do. You tend to stay out of politics.
That is very true, Dana. I think of myself as being a technocrat and someone who focuses on the technical details and trying to get policy right. And that's always been the way I've thought about my role. But I will also say that this is a moment where people need to step forward. And I think you will see among the military officers, the diplomats, the security specialists who've signed this letter that there are a lot of people like me, people who have felt it their duty to stay out of politics, to be the military leaders, the technocrats, but now people are saying Trump is unfit for office and we need to do what we can do to ensure that Joe Biden is elected the next president.
Why is he unfit for office?
Well, there's a lot of evidence out there, the most recent being Bob Woodward's book. And for me, the most heartbreaking thing is his treatment of the coronavirus pandemic and how he seemed to realize way back in January how serious this was going to be. And yet he kept talking it down to the American people. He said again yesterday, we are beating this virus, we are over it, we've reached the peak. And all the experts say here in the United States that we have not reached the peak and in fact could be facing another very bad bout this winter with the flu season coming on. So, you know, the man is really irresponsible and does not talk the truth to the American people.
I was just listening to, I went down that list and looked at some of the names, and there's a lot of very impressive people on there. And I was just listening to a video that a retired General Chuck Boyd made, who was an Air Force general, and he's a former Vietnam prisoner, Republican for life. And he said, we may not, if you don't vote for Biden, have a working democracy in 2024. Now, is that melodramatic, or do you really think that's what's on the line?
It's what's keeping me awake at night these days, Dana. You mentioned my long work on nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons arms control. They don't keep me awake at night because I do feel like we and the Russian Federation have worked hard over the years, Soviet Union earlier, to put these systems under control and to deter each other, to have a balance so that we are deterred from trying to strike each other, thank God, with these horrific weapons. They don't keep me awake at night. What keeps me awake at night is the thought that in 2024, our democracy could be damaged profoundly. And that is truly a worry that I have at this time.
Trump has said when he was questioned about a peaceful transition of power, we'll see. He's questioned mail-in ballots. And this sounds like a president who's bent on keeping power regardless of the election results. Or do you think the media is making too much of that? Do you think that once the numbers come in, if it's convincing, or if it takes a couple of weeks to count all the postal ballots, that, you know, Trump's bluster will go away and he'll accept the result? Or do you think he may not?
Trump is clearly a great showman, and he loves to keep the audience guessing. And so he'll always do the ultimate to keep the news cameras focused on himself, to keep the news cycle focused on himself. And I do think that's part of what is at work here. And he started it with his debates with Hillary Clinton way back in 2016. We're having our first presidential debate here tonight in the United States, and we will see how it goes. I'm very much hoping that, of course, it will go well for Joe Biden, and I think he will certainly be well prepared. But the point is, Trump will repeat these kinds of things again and again. But at the core of my concern is the fact that he has no regard for the rule of law, and he has no regard for the Constitution. the Constitution of the United States. So where I take comfort at the moment is in the fact that the Republican congressional leadership has stepped forward, including Mitch McConnell, who has been a great ally of Trump so far as leader in the Senate. But he has stepped forward and said, we will have a peaceful transfer of power. And I think that these are important messages and give some comfort, but still the bottom line is Trump does not believe in the Constitution or the rule of law.
I'm shaking my head that I'm even asking you about it, because I would interview you in Moscow before at the Carnegie Center, and we would talk about Russia's democracy and ballot stuffing and were the elections real and would Putin, give up the vertical power, and suddenly we're talking about it in America. What does that say about the center, the system, that you can have a president in there who maybe we've never encountered a personality like this before. I think that's fair to say. Is the personality strong enough to derail the system? I thought the checks and balances in American democracy were so much stronger.
It's shocking, isn't it, how quickly we could come to look like Putin's Russia, or some here, even in the United States, are recollecting the 1930s in Germany. I won't go that far. I do think that our system of checks and balances has a strength to it that now will have to prove itself. There's just no question about it, which is again why I take comfort from the strong words that are coming from Capitol Hill from our congressional leaders, including on the Republican side. And of course, our court, the Supreme Court, is keeping quiet about this. That's right and proper. And the fact that, Trump is working hard to put his appointees on the court and to make sure that there is a majority of a more conservative hue. But nevertheless, I do believe that the court would stand up for US constitutional prerogatives as well. And the appointee who has been put forward by President Trump is one who says that she takes a very strict reading of the Constitution. So I would hope, even if she should be already on the bench at the time of such a crisis in January, that in fact she too would be standing up strongly on behalf of the Constitution.
I hope you're right, Rose. I mean, it's startling to me that we could have chaos on election night with two different candidates for the presidency claiming that they were the winners, and some kind of stalemate that could go on for weeks and weeks and potentially a month or two.
I think the experts have been right, Dana, to underscore the importance of not focusing on election night per se, because of the fact, and it's right and proper with all the pandemic raging in different parts of the United States, including in the Midwest these days, which was spared earlier, but now sadly is suffering its own share of hotspots in my own state of Ohio and up in the upper Midwest and Wisconsin and so forth. So
people don't want to go out and vote in that environment.
Exactly. They want to be safe. They want to cast their ballot by mail, and that is right and proper. The president himself casts his ballot by mail in Florida. And so I think it will be important that people do not either panic or rush to judgment on election day, but wait and let the ballots be counted. It could be several days afterwards. This is normal enough, and I've seen it across the democracies in Europe now as mail-in voting and other forms of voting have taken place during this pandemic, that sometimes the word is not there on the actual election day. It takes a few more days, or maybe a week. But in any event, that's the message that's coming through clearly from the experts here. Don't focus so much on election day. We may not know for several days or a week or maybe 2 weeks who actually will be the president of the United States.
As a great, watcher of history and politics, political science, here's a media question for you. What should the media, people like me, what should we be doing on election night? Because if it's clear the results are unclear, we shouldn't be carrying claims to victory, or should we?
Well, far be it from me to advise the
media
what to do, but I would just take that same caution that I just articulated. That is that It will be important to see carefully how many votes have actually been counted, not how many votes have been cast by the time we reach midnight on November 3rd. And then say, all right, let's stand back and wait and see where the final vote comes in. It will be very unsatisfying for the media, I know. And I have heard several express frustration here in the United States that it's not going to be the same kind of cliffhanger on election night that everybody loves because the ratings are so great. But I think it will be important to let the process unfold, and it will take some time.
Couple of quick questions, and then I'll let you go. In your role at NATO, you no doubt have been to these moving ceremonies in Normandy and in France for World War I and World War II. Do you believe the reports in the Atlantic that Trump, when he was supposed to go to a memorial service in 2018, said, "I'm not going to go and honor those losers"?
Oh, Dana, it's so hard to believe that because they're such horrible remarks. But I will say, I was at NATO at that time. It was the 100th anniversary of the end of World War II in 2018. I was the Deputy Secretary General of NATO. All of us, the leaders of NATO, both civilian and military, were fanning out because there were many, many ceremonies. And Belgium is, right at the heart of where World War I was fought. And so it still is a living event for many Belgians and for many Belgian cities. So we were really doing everything we could to represent NATO across these ceremonies. So every one of them was wrenching and really made you realize how great the toll of this war for the countries of Europe. And then when I heard that Trump wouldn't go to the ceremony because he would have to drive in the rain and it would be raining, I was shocked. I thought, really? So I don't know if he made those remarks. I cannot tell that. But I will tell you that I was very shocked at the time that the President of the United States would let a little rain deter him from paying honor to the dead in France. So I was very shocked indeed. And he paid a price. He got a lot of bad publicity out of that. And so that's what he pays attention to. The next day he did head off to another ceremony to try, I think, to make amends. But to my mind, it was too late. He'd already showed that he had no concern or regard for those who had suffered.
Do you have concerns that America could back out of NATO if Trump is reelected?
Well, it's interesting. I think NATO has done a great job, and I always give a huge amount of credit to my old boss, Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, because he went out of his way, I think, to develop a good relationship with Trump, and really has used Trump to do what the NATO allies have promised to do since 2014, to raise their defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2024.
But
And
Trump
so
is known for ripping up agreements, whether it be the START treaty or whether it be agreements with Russia or and NATO. I mean, yes, he's put pressure on them, but some people feel he could back out of the support for NATO. I mean, and in America is no doubt the strongest pillar.
Well, I'm saying yes. With Trump, it's not easy to predict the future. There's no question about that. But I will say, I think that his attitude toward NATO is different today than it was when he first came to NATO in May of 2017. And I think now, looking back on that we had a one-day short meeting at our new NATO headquarters, and that's when he publicly raised doubts about the US commitment to Article 5. But since that time, I think that his role in raising the defense expenditures in NATO countries has made him feel that, this is something I won on. So I don't think he has the same attitude today as he had back in 2017. We will see if I'm right or not, but I do know that I could see that his attitude was changing. For example, we were in Washington in April in 2019 to commemorate the 75th anniversary of NATO's establishment, 70th anniversary rather, forgive me. And, Trump received the leadership of NATO in the Oval Office, Jens Stoltenberg, Yeah, he was, as usual, rough in his criticism, but he was feeling also proud that he'd gotten NATO to pay up.
Maybe he understands the alliance a bit better than he did when he first came to office. Rose Gottemoeller, thank you so much. You're always generous with your time, Rose. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dana. Good to see you.
Good to see you.